how did Hamas come out or come about? When children in the 1940s witnessed the IDF, the newly formed IDF, or the militia of the newly formed and established Israeli state, go through villages and line up children, I think it was 14 or 16 and above, and to adults, and massacred them, shot them all dead. One of the 8-year-old children witnessed this. You can only imagine what was inculcated in his heart, seeing his father, uncles, others murdered, until he became one of the founders of Hamas. Let's look elsewhere. When we look at Iraq and the wars that were started in Iraq from 1991, the first Gulf War, then 20th of March 2003, the second incursion into Iraq, despite one of the biggest marches in the history of the UK against this war. And as we know, weapons of mass destruction were never found. But after that particular war, and the camps that were set up, and the abuse that took place in some of those camps, as we know, the pictures emerged years later. One of those camps, Camp Buka, held a number of Iraqis who had grown up knowing what had happened since 1991. And they had communicated with each other while in Camp Buka. Some of them taking numbers and stitching them into their underwear for further contact. And when eventually released, and after the withdrawal of US troops, started rallying together to form what we now know as the Islamic State, Daesh. When we go further afield to South Africa and the apartheid era, and children seeing their parents and themselves treated as second-class citizens and oppressed in a land that was theirs, what do you think that instilled, inculcated in their hearts? Resentment and the will of resistance. When we go further back in history and we look at the transatlantic slavery and we see what happened to generations after that, and how the Africans and the generations of Africans revolted, how Haiti became the first land of freed slaves and defeating the French, even though it crippled them economically for generations afterwards. When such oppression, sustained oppression, unjust treatment is meted out to any population, the risk and the likelihood of the subsequent generations being nurtured on that, being prepared on that, means that they are going to be even stronger in their resolve to lift off that yoke of oppression as they grow older. So what could this do to the next generation of Palestinians who survive? The annals of history show us that they will continue to rise up and challenge and resist the oppression that they and their forefathers have faced. Unless, of course, a systematic strategy of brainwashing means that they don't even remember their forebears or what they went through, and they are assimilated, not integrated, assimilated into society. So they no longer recognize their past. And this latter aspect I'm speaking about happened to a degree to the Bosnian Muslims in the Balkans up until the conflict erupted, and they were distinguished by their identity, by neighbors, husbands, wives who they had intermingled and assimilated with. And because of that ideological drive of the Croatians and the Serbians, they said, you don't belong, you've never belonged. And then we saw on Europe soil, in Europe, across the Europe, we heard this language that is being repeated now to the Palestinians. Ethnic cleansing took place. And I'll conclude quickly on this point. We're talking about ethnic cleansing now in the 21st century, 2023. Do not be fooled that this is a new thing in Palestine. The ethnic cleansing started with a strategy called, the fourth part of a strategy called Plan D, Dalut, the Dalut plan, D-A-L-U-T. It was the fourth and final aspect of a plan. And in 1948, the plan's available to see, it was implemented to ethnically cleanse the Palestinians from Palestine. And across that year, throughout that year and beyond, 800,000 Palestinians were displaced, and 500 and something, 550, I recall, cities, villages, Palestinian villages, were razed to the ground into non-existence. So I'm giving this elaboration to show there's a context within which those who survive this will grow. And it's been there in the annals of history and will continue to be there across the world when oppression of the levels that we're seeing, that are state legislated, are done to an indigenous people or done to an established people systematically.